There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and here I am with a kind of video that I haven't done for a long time, but this is such a fun kind of video to do. I thought, you know what, let's see if there's an article about some new releases or something on the internet somewhere that I can just react to. So that's what I've got here. This is from the CBC website, their book section. 32 Canadian books to read in spring 2023. And I found a grand total of 7 that were of interest to me. I'm going to put the link to the article in the show notes. You may find a whole bunch more that interest you. And, you know, depending on your reading personality, like I have a sneaky suspicion that when Lindy peruses this list, she will have a completely different set of books, or at least have a whole bunch of other books that she'll want to read too. So yeah, do check out the list. But here is my curated paraphrase of that list, plus one more book that I know about from another source, so to make it an even number. 8 forthcoming or new releases in the Canadian book world. And this will be a good chance to once again reaffirm how ugly Canadian book covers usually are. Although the first one's not bad. It is called In the Upper Country by Kai Thomas. And I believe Lindy has read a book or two by him, but maybe not. It is a historical novel set in mid-19th century southern Ontario through the eyes of a young black journalist. An enslaved American woman has escaped and actually killed a slave hunter, and she's in jail, presumably in southern Ontario, and a black journalist interviews her. Kai Thomas brings in indigenous communities and histories into the novel, so it sounds really fascinating. The author is a writer, carpenter, and land steward. I have no idea what a land steward is, but there is a link there to an interview that the wonderful Sheila Rogers of the CBC book show and radio show and podcast, The Next Chapter, did with him. So I'm going to have a listen to that sometime, and you might want to too. That one sounds right up my street. Next is a novel about switched eggs during an in vitro fertilization process, and it's by a black Canadian writer I've never heard of, Charlene Carr. The novel title is Hold My Girl. The premise itself just grabs me. Charlene Carr's hometown is Toronto, but she now lives in Nova Scotia. Her first novel with a major publisher, so I guess that means she's, you know, had some small press novels before that, or self-published. Next is a novel that, I don't know if the entire novel is a historical novel, but certainly the quest at the center of the novel goes back into Congolese history. This is called In the Belly of the Congo by Blaise Ndala. It's about, I'm just going to take a wild guess, it doesn't say here, but I'm presuming a Congolese Canadian woman who goes to Brussels, Belgium, to attend university. And her father asks her to find out about her grandmother's disappearance, and the story goes back to a Congolese princess, who I assume is the grandmother, the daughter of the king of the Kuba people in Congo. I don't need to know anymore, that just sounds absolutely fascinating. Blaise Ndala is a Congolese-Canadian writer based in Ottawa. Oh, this might be translated, because he has written 2 French-language novels that have won literary prizes. Came out in February this year. Oh, yes, it was. Translated from the French by Amy B. Reid. That was not clear in the CBC article, but now it's clear for all of us. Next is a Asian Canadian novel by an Asian Canadian writer, and the novel is set in Newfoundland. That got my attention. It's called Hollow Bamboo by Howard Ping, and it's based on a true story. It has magical realism and satire, 2 things that I have been insisting that I'm against in my literature, in my fiction, but I'm kind of getting on to magical realism, and especially when it's not white magical realism, I tend to get along with it better. And, you know, satire is kind of hit and miss, so I want to give this a try, because it is the story of Chinese emigration to Newfoundland, and I know absolutely nothing about that, and that just sounds fascinating. The protagonist is a millennial named William Ping. That happens to also be the author's name, so autofiction, apparently. he finds himself in an uncomfortable conversation with his girlfriend's parents about his ethnicity. And then he goes into the bathroom to kind of regain his composure, and he is visited by a stubborn, sarcastic spirit. And the story goes from there, and it goes back into history. The history of his grandfather, the first William Ping, who arrived in Newfoundland from China in 1931. Oh, this is his debut novel. Vincent Lam is an Asian-Canadian writer who has, I think he's won major awards. In fact, I see right here, he won the Giller in 2006 for his short story collection, Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures. And I think he's maybe written other stuff too. But this is his new novel, which actually is a follow-up to that short story collection. It's called On the Ravine. He is a doctor and a writer of fiction, short story writer, now a novelist, and he has picked up two of the characters from the short story collection and revisits them several years later in their career. I didn't ever read Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures, and probably I should start with that. But he has been a writer on my want-to-read list ever since 2006, so it probably wouldn't make too much sense to start with a novel, but who knows? I don't have to make sense, do I? Why start now? He is based in Toronto. I'm not going to mention every time when there's an interview, but I think for most, if not all of these books, there are links to CBC interviews, many of them with Sheila Rogers from the next chapter, but other CBC personalities. I love the CBC, don't get me started, in this article, so you can find out more that way. Here is a work of nonfiction, but this deeply appeals to the, in other words, etymologist side of my reading brain. It is called Pandexicon by Wayne Grady, and the subtitle is How the Language of the Pandemic Defined Our New Cultural Reality, and it's looking at language and new words, new vocabulary that has emerged during and because of the pandemic. So that sounds really fascinating. Wayne Grady is, he's a novelist, and I've never read anything by him, but he's written 3 novels, several books of nonfiction. And it's about high time that I rectified that oversight, because he's quite a well-known Canadian writer. And I think I probably will start with Pandexicon. Next is one that was on my 2023 most anticipated releases, and I know it's out in print just in the last few weeks because I saw a copy in the bookstore, couldn't afford to buy it. But you're wanting to get to this one really soon. It's called The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters. And it is, I'm not sure that I would call a book set in 1962 a historical novel, but I know some would, so let's just say it's set in Maine in 1962, and it's about a Mi'kmaq indigenous family that go down to make money picking blueberries in Maine, which was the way that a big part of their income or whatever, I'm assuming, and their little 4-year-old daughter goes missing, and that's the premise of the story. Amanda Peters is a writer who has some Mi'kmaq ancestry mixed with settler ancestry, and she lives in Nova Scotia, and this book just sounds so fascinating. And I think, Heidi, that we need to add this to our buddy read list. Next is a novel by I guess he's a writer, but he's more of a kind of a book journalist. His name is Antanas Šileika. And I know him, I don't know him, but I know of him. He's familiar to me because he's a frequent guest on that fabulous book show that I've mentioned twice already, The Next Chapter by Sheila Rogers. And he, I don't know if it's monthly or however often, but I love when he comes on to tell her about new books because he has, in a way, similar taste to mine. He recommends really obscure stuff that nobody else in the world has ever heard of, and that's why I love him. I've never read anything he's written, and he's written 6 books, and at least one of them is a memoir. This is a novel called Unfinished Business, and it's the story of a man. I don't know if he's Russian or what he is. His name is Martin Averka. That doesn't sound Russian to me, but I'm not sure. It could be one of the other Soviet nationalities. During Soviet occupation and imprisonment in the Gulag, so if it's occupation, then he's probably from, I want to say Hungary, because I believe Antanas Šileika is Hungarian, of Hungarian extraction, isn't he? Lithuanian. He's a Canadian-Lithuanian novelist. So I bet you that this protagonist is Lithuanian. Oh, okay. That sounds even all the more interesting to me. He survives the horrors of the prison camps, the Gulag, but then he's motivated by revenge towards the man that betrayed him and his friends that got them into prison. And so this is set sometime after his release. Wow. And so those are the ones in the article. I actually see there's two more. I'll just mention them in passing. One is Coronation Year by Jennifer Robson. It's set at the time of Queen Elizabeth's 1953 coronation. I don't usually read historical fiction like this. I don't. I'd rather read nonfiction, but it's set in a hotel, and the Queen's carriage is supposed to go by on her way to Westminster Abbey. Isn't that where they do the coronations? But anyway, it's something that I'd like to kind of check out anyway. And Chrysalis by Anuja Varghese. It's a short story collection, and she is a Hamilton, Ontario-based writer and editor, and I'm assuming of Indian extraction, but I don't know that for sure. The stories are about racialized women. Short story collections get my attention. The cover is not bad. Okay, so those two I'm kind of just quickly mentioning in passing because I should have included them. And now, the one that's actually, it was published April 1st, but I'm going to the book launch at the end of April here in Saskatoon. It is by a Nigerian-Canadian writer who lives in Saskatoon, and I didn't know anything about him until I found out about this book launch. It's called Leave My Bones in Saskatoon by Michael Afenfia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I will tell you later because I'm planning to go to the book launch here in Saskatoon at the end of April. The protagonist is a television presenter. As the story opens, he and the family have been accepted for permanent residency in Canada, and then they immigrate. But there's a whole bunch of dark obstacles thrown in their way before they actually get out of Nigeria. Then the story kind of moves, or at least includes, his teenage daughter and her dealing with that transition from Nigeria to Saskatoon. Oh my God, what a transition that must be to Saskatchewan winters. Michael Afenfia was born in Nigeria, now lives in Saskatoon. He has had two other novels that have won prizes in Nigeria, and I can't wait to hear more about this novel. I don't need to know anything more about it now, but I'll be talking about it a lot after I've been to the book launch. So I just feel absolutely wonderful having made this kind of a chatty book video. So which of these sound interesting to you? I want to try them all. I don't think of very many of them I'll try this year because I'm kind of overcommitted for what I'm planning to read this year, but they all sound pretty interesting to me. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.